In the 1950s, the U.S. government sent thousands of soldiers into the Nevada desert without any protective gear or warnings. These troops were positioned in trenches a few miles from nuclear bombs detonated during tests. After the blast, they were ordered to stand up and walk toward Ground Zero. This operation, known as Operation Desert Rock, was not merely a military exercise but an experimental test on soldiers themselves. It raises critical questions about the ethics of using soldiers as test subjects, the number of lives affected, and why this story remains largely unknown. In August 1945, the U.S. ended World War II by dropping atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing over 100,000 people and establishing the U.S. nuclear monopoly, briefly. However, this dominance was short-lived. Soviet espionage had penetrated the Manhattan Project, with spies like Klaus Fuchs leaking bomb data to the USSR, which enabled the Soviets to develop atomic weapons sooner than expected. By 1949, the Soviets exploded their first atomic bomb, igniting the nuclear arms race where nuclear war became a grim reality requiring preparation. Operation Desert Rock was an effort to collect real data on soldier survivability in nuclear battle conditions. Between 1951 and 1957, over 18,000 troops participated in these tests, equipped only with standard helmets, no radiation suits or shielding. Soldiers were transported to the Nevada test site, told to dig trenches near Ground Zero and endure the bomb detonations. Many witnessed intense flashes so bright they could see their bones through closed eyelids. The blasts caused shockwaves, heat, and flying debris physically impacting troops. Following the blasts, soldiers often had to march directly into the fallout zones under orders meant to build confidence, unaware of the radiation dangers they had just faced. Operation Desert Rock culminated in particularly severe tests like Operation Shot Hood in 1957. Part of Operation Plum Bomb, Shot Hood was the largest above-ground nuclear test in U.S. history. The 74-kiloton explosion, 5 times the Hiroshima bomb's power, occurred just 2 miles from 2,000 soldiers ordered to remain in trenches. The blast vaporized desert floor, unleashed extreme heat and destructive shockwaves, and blanketed troops with radioactive dust. Without masks or decontamination procedures, soldiers faced unknown radioactive fallout, unprepared for the lasting risks. This chapter of history highlights profound sacrifices made by troops under government orders in the Cold War context. A story seldom told but crucial to understanding the human cost of nuclear preparedness. Radiation exposure during these nuclear tests was indeed extreme and entirely preventable. The gravest injustice was that soldiers were never informed about the dangers, not during the tests nor afterward. Many only discovered they had been irradiated when illness began to manifest, sometimes years later. Several veterans died prematurely, while others lived seemingly normal lives until cancers like leukemia, thyroid cancer, lymphoma, and tumors in various organs appeared, often within a decade. When these servicemen sought assistance, the Veterans Administration frequently denied their claims because the government had maintained the narrative that the tests were safe. Yet, internal military documents revealed officials were aware of the dangerous radiation levels but chose to evade responsibility. The impact extended beyond soldiers. Downwind communities near the Nevada test site, known as downwinders, experienced clusters of cancer, birth defects, and miscarriages, but their concerns were dismissed. One veteran poignantly summarized their plight: "We weren't trained for nuclear war. We were sacrificed to sell it." It took until 1990, more than 30 years later, for the U.S. government to enact the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, by which time many had already died. What makes this even more troubling is that the U.S. already understood radiation's deadly effects. In 1947, just 2 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the U.S. initiated the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission to study Japanese survivors. However, it was not a humanitarian mission. Survivors, many suffering severe injuries, were told they would receive no treatment, only observation. The goal was to gather data on radiation's long-term effects on the human body. Having studied the horrific consequences in Japan, the U.S. then replicated similar exposure on its own soldiers. Why? Because while data from Japan documented radiation's impact on civilians, the Pentagon sought specific knowledge about how radiation would affect troops, military equipment, and battlefield morale. They did not want to discover if radiation was deadly, they already knew that. Instead, they wanted detailed information to prepare for nuclear warfare, even at the cost of their own men. This marks a dark chapter in Cold War history where human lives were sacrificed in the pursuit of military readiness. The military's core objective with Operation Desert Rock was to determine if soldiers could still operate effectively after a nuclear blast. that nuclear war could be survivable and even winnable. To answer these questions, they needed realistic conditions: actual nuclear detonations, real equipment, and human subjects. This wasn't happenstance but a cold, strategic calculation. They weighed the risks and decided that sacrificing their own troops was an acceptable cost. They needed to observe whether soldiers would panic, freeze, or continue fighting, how blasts would impact equipment like tanks, bunkers, and trenches, and how morale would hold up in such extreme conditions. They sought to understand the closest safe proximity to a nuclear explosion where soldiers could still function and to model a tactical nuclear battlefield where troops would be sent in immediately following a detonation. This approach revealed a harsh truth about their perspective on American soldiers, viewed as expendable assets rather than protected individuals. Testing on living troops provided more accurate data than theoretical war games, but it also meant knowingly risking lives and health. The fact that a nation would subject its own servicemen to nuclear exposure and then conceal the reality behind national security raises profound ethical questions. It invites reflection on what other truths may have been hidden from the public and challenges the assumption that any of us are fully safe from government decisions made under the guise of security. Operation Desert Rock stands as a stark reminder of the sacrifices made in secrecy during the Cold War and calls for awareness and accountability about such actions. What are your thoughts on this troubling episode of history? Thank you for engaging with the land of history. Feel free to share your comments or suggestions for future topics below, and please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel.